The metal tool slipped from Jake Morrison's calloused hands as orange flames erupted through the mansion's ground floor. Water dripped steadily from somewhere in the walls, a cruel irony as fire consumed the Whitmore estate's mahogany panels. Through the smoke, he could hear someone screaming from the second floor, the same commanding voice that had dismissed him 6 months earlier with surgical precision. Jake wiped soot from his weathered face, his instincts warring with a simpler, more human calculation. He looked up at the window where shadows moved frantically behind the glass. Eleanor Whitmore's eyes went wide as she recognized the soot-covered face beneath her office window. Jake Morrison had never imagined he'd return to the Whitmore estate under these circumstances. 6 months ago, he'd walked through those same ornate front doors, wearing his only good suit, clutching a resume that felt woefully inadequate in his trembling hands. The marble floors had echoed with each nervous step as he'd made his way to Eleanor Whitmore's corner office past portraits of distinguished ancestors and awards that gleamed under crystal chandeliers. The interview had lasted exactly 12 minutes. Eleanor had barely glanced at his application before delivering her verdict with the kind of cold efficiency that had built her insurance empire. "Mr. Morrison, our company requires a certain caliber of professional. Someone with extensive experience in corporate environments, advanced degrees, proven leadership in complex financial sectors." Her fingers never stopped typing as she spoke, each keystroke punctuating her dismissal. "Your background in manual labor, while I'm sure respectable in its own way, simply doesn't align with our standards." Jake had sat there for a moment, watching her manicured nails dance across the keyboard, feeling smaller with each passing second. He'd wanted to tell her about the certifications he'd earned working nights after 12-hour shifts, about the business courses he'd taken online, while his daughter slept dreaming of providing her with something better than the paycheck-to-paycheck existence they'd been scraping by on since her mother's death. But Eleanor's dismissive tone had made it clear that explanations would be unwelcome. "Thank you for your time." Eleanor had finally looked up, then offering a smile that never reached her eyes. "Of course, we'll be in touch if anything suitable opens up." They both knew that call would never come. Now, 6 months later, Jake found himself back at the Whitmore estate for an entirely different reason. The emergency plumbing call had come in at 8:47 on a Tuesday evening, just as he was helping his 7-year-old daughter, Emma, with her math homework. The dispatcher had been frantic water damage threatening the mansion's electrical system and urgent repair needed before morning. "Daddy, will you be back to check my homework?" "I promise, sweetheart. This is just a quick job. Mrs. Patterson will stay with you until I get back. But you promise to help with the fractions part." "And I will, as soon as I get home. Pinky promise." Jake had kissed Emma goodnight, promised to check on her when he got home, and driven through the October rain to the imposing iron gates he'd hoped never to see again. The mansion's basement had been a maze of copper pipes and century-old fixtures, the kind of complex system that required both skill and patience to navigate. Jake had been working methodically, tracing the source of a persistent leak that had been slowly flooding the electrical room when the lights flickered once, twice, then died completely. In the darkness, he had heard the sharp crack of electrical discharge, followed by the distinctive whoosh of flames finding fuel. The fire had spread with terrifying speed through the mansion's dry wooden framework. Jake had stumbled through the basement in the dark, following the familiar weight of his emergency flashlight, making his way toward the stairs as smoke began to fill the corridors above. His firefighter training from years past had kicked in automatically. Stay low, find an exit, assess the situation. But as he'd reached the main floor, something had stopped him cold. The scream had come from directly above him, high-pitched with panic and unmistakably female. Through the smoke, Jake had recognized not just the voice, but the authority it carried even in terror. Eleanor Whitmore was trapped somewhere on the second floor, and from the sound of the flames crackling through the walls, she didn't have long. For a moment that felt like an eternity, Jake had stood frozen at the base of the grand staircase. The rational part of his mind cataloged the dangers. The fire was spreading too quickly. The old wooden structure was compromised. Smoke was thickening by the second. Every instinct told him to get out, to call the fire department from outside to save himself. After all, what did he owe Eleanor Whitmore? She'd made it crystal clear that his life, his struggles, his hopes meant nothing to her. But there was another voice in Jake's head, quieter but more insistent. It sounded like his late wife Sarah reminding him of the man she'd fallen in love with. It sounded like his daughter Emma asking why Daddy's eyes looked so sad after that job interview. Most of all, it sounded like his own conscience, the part of him that had run into burning buildings for 8 years before a piece of falling debris had ended his firefighting career and left him with a permanent limp. Jake took the stairs two at a time, his work boots finding purchase on the mahogany steps, even as heat pressed against his face like an open furnace. The second-floor hallway was a tunnel of smoke and flickering orange light, with visibility down to mere feet. He followed Eleanor's voice calling out directions as he navigated past oil paintings, whose subjects seemed to watch accusingly through the haze. He found her in her home office, the same room where she'd destroyed his hopes 6 months earlier. The heavy oak door had warped from the heat, jamming tight in its frame. Through the gap at the bottom, Jake could see Eleanor's shadow pacing frantically, could hear her voice growing hoarse as she called for help. The irony wasn't lost on him. The woman who deemed him unworthy now depended entirely on his willingness to risk everything for her safety. "Eleanor, it's Jake Morrison. I'm going to get you out of there." There was a moment of silence, broken only by the sound of flames consuming the walls around them. Then Eleanor's voice, smaller than he'd ever heard it. "Jake, the maintenance man, stand back from the door." Jake positioned himself, carefully favoring his good leg as he prepared to shoulder through the warped wood. It took 3 attempts, each impact sending jolts of pain through his old injury before the door finally splintered open. Eleanor was pressed against the far wall, her usually perfect appearance disheveled and streaked with soot. Her expensive business suit was torn at the shoulder, her carefully styled hair hanging loose around her face. But it was her eyes that struck Jake most wide with fear, yes, but also with something that looked almost like recognition. Not just of his face, but of the magnitude of what he was doing. "The window. I tried to open it, but it's stuck." Jake crossed the room in 3 strides, examining the old-fashioned window mechanism. Years of paint and weather had sealed the frame tight, but his practiced hands found the release points. With a sharp blow from his elbow, he cracked the glass, then used his jacket to clear away the sharp edges. "It's a 15-foot drop, but there's a hedge below that should break your fall." Eleanor nodded, her face pale but determined. As Jake helped her climb onto the windowsill, she suddenly gripped his arm with surprising strength. "Why, after what I said to you, why are you doing this?" Jake met her eyes for just a moment, seeing past the corporate facade to something more vulnerable beneath. "Because it's the right thing to do. Now go." Eleanor dropped from the window with more grace than Jake had expected, landing hard, but safely in the ornamental bushes below. Jake had been preparing to follow when a section of the ceiling collapsed behind him, sending a shower of sparks and burning debris across the room. The fire had reached the office, and his escape route was rapidly disappearing. As Jake positioned himself at the window, he took one last look around the room that had been the site of his humiliation. Eleanor's desk was still there, the same computer where she'd typed dismissively while crushing his dreams. Her diplomas and awards lined the walls, testament to a life of achievement he'd never be able to match. But none of that seemed to matter now, consumed as it all would be by flames that cared nothing for status or success. The drop was harder on Jake than Eleanor, his injured leg buckling on impact and sending him tumbling into the hedge with decidedly less dignity. But he'd made it out, and that was what mattered. As he struggled to his feet, brushing leaves and thorns from his work clothes, he found Eleanor standing nearby, her face illuminated by the orange glow of her burning home. She'd been staring up at the mansion, watching flames dance behind the windows of rooms that had held a lifetime of memories. Her shoulders shook slightly, though whether from cold shock or something deeper, Jake couldn't tell. He wanted to say something to offer comfort or reassurance, but the gap between their worlds felt as vast as ever. Instead, he pulled out his phone to call the fire department, his hands surprisingly steady as he reported the address and situation. Eleanor remained silent beside him, her arms wrapped around herself as they watched her inheritance transform into an inferno. When the distant wail of sirens finally reached them, Jake felt the tension in his chest begin to ease. The firefighters arrived with the efficiency Jake remembered from his own years on the force, their trucks positioning with practiced precision as teams deployed to contain the blaze. Jake gave his statement to the fire chief, explaining about the electrical failure and the rapid spread through the old wood structure. Eleanor was checked by paramedics who treated her for minor smoke inhalation and a scraped palm from her window escape. As the immediate crisis passed, Jake found himself standing awkwardly beside his work van, unsure whether to leave or stay. The job that had brought him here was obviously incomplete, though under the circumstances nobody was worried about a leaking pipe. Eleanor approached him as he was loading his tools, her steps hesitant but purposeful. "Jake, I need to thank you. What you did tonight. She trailed off, shaking her head. I don't know how to adequately express my gratitude. Jake paused in his packing tool in hand, considering how to respond. Part of him wanted to be gracious, to accept her thanks and move on as if the past 6 months had never happened. But another part, the part that had struggled to explain to his daughter why good work sometimes wasn't enough, needed something more. Eleanor, 6 months ago you told me I wasn't the caliber of person your company needed. Tonight, when it mattered most, what caliber did I turn out to be? The question hung between them, like smoke carrying weight that neither could ignore. Eleanor's composure cracked slightly, her professional mask slipping to reveal something more human underneath. She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again, as if realizing that her usual corporate speak wouldn't suffice. The moment was interrupted by a paramedic approaching with a clipboard needing Eleanor's signature on treatment forms. As she turned away to handle the paperwork, Jake finished loading his van. The question still unanswered, but somehow having served its purpose anyway. Some truths, he reflected, didn't need to be spoken aloud to be understood. But as Jake climbed into his van and started the engine, Eleanor appeared at his window, her hand resting on the glass. The soot on her face had been partially cleaned away by the paramedics, but her expensive suit remained a testament to the night's chaos. When Jake rolled down the window, she leaned close enough that he could see the genuine emotion in her eyes. The caliber of person that I should have recognized 6 months ago. Jake nodded once, accepting both the acknowledgement and the apology it represented. As he drove away from the burning mansion, watching the flames shrink in his rearview mirror, he felt something shift inside him. Not vindication exactly, but a kind of closure he hadn't realized he needed. The drive home was quiet, the familiar streets of Millbrook taking on a different quality in the pre-dawn darkness. Jake found himself thinking not about Eleanor's words of gratitude, but about the moment of recognition in her eyes, the instant when she'd truly seen him, perhaps for the first time. It wasn't the victory he'd fantasized about during those long months of rejection and struggle, but it felt more substantial, somehow more real. Emma was fast asleep when Jake crept into their small apartment, her math homework still spread across the kitchen table where he'd left it. He stood in her doorway for a long moment, watching her peaceful face in the hallway light, thinking about the questions she'd stopped asking about his job search. At 7 years old, she was already learning to protect him from her disappointment, a burden no child should carry. The next morning brought an unexpected phone call. Jake was scrambling eggs for Emma's breakfast when his phone buzzed with an unknown number. Eleanor's voice sounded different over the phone, less commanding, more tentative than he remembered. Jake, I hope I'm not calling too early. I got your number from the emergency dispatch service. I wanted to follow up about last night. And also, well, there's something I think you should know. Jake listened as Eleanor explained about the insurance investigation, how the electrical fire would require extensive documentation and witness testimony. But there was something else in her tone, a hesitation, that suggested the call wasn't purely professional. I've been thinking about what you said, about caliber, about recognition. I realize I owe you more than just thanks. I owe you an explanation. They agreed to meet at a small diner downtown Neutral Territory that belonged to neither of their worlds. Jake arrived first, choosing a booth in the back where they could talk without drawing attention. When Eleanor walked through the door, 20 minutes later, she looked almost unrecognizable in jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail that made her appear younger and somehow more approachable. She slid into the booth across from him, declining his offer of coffee, but accepting a glass of water with hands that shook slightly. For several minutes, they sat in awkward silence, the weight of the previous night hanging between them like unfinished business. My adoptive father was Captain Robert Sterling. Eleanor's voice was barely above a whisper. He died 10 years ago in a warehouse fire downtown, trying to save a family trapped on the 4th floor. Jake's coffee cup froze halfway to his lips. Captain Sterling. He'd known the name, respected it, had served under him for 2 years before transferring to a different station. Robert Sterling had been the kind of leader who inspired absolute loyalty, the type of man who led by example and never asked his team to take risks he wouldn't take himself. He used to talk about his team constantly. There was one firefighter in particular that he mentioned often, someone who had an instinct for reading fire behavior, who could navigate smoke-filled buildings like he had a built-in compass. Someone who'd saved more lives than anyone could count, including a pregnant woman from a 3rd-floor apartment fire on Elm Street. The memory hit Jake like a physical blow. Elm Street fire, carrying Mrs. Rodriguez down 3 flights of stairs while her husband screamed from the street below. She'd given birth to a healthy baby girl 2 weeks later, had named her Sarah after Jake's wife. It had been one of those calls that reminded him why he'd chosen the profession, why the danger and exhaustion were worth it. Robert called him his best firefighter. He said this man had a gift that he could see solutions where others saw only problems. He said if he ever had to choose someone to trust with his own life, it would be Jake Morrison. The revelation settled over Jake like a heavy blanket, bringing with it a complex mix of emotions he wasn't prepared to process. Pride certainly at hearing Captain Sterling's assessment of his abilities, but also a deep sadness for the connection he'd never known existed, for the opportunity lost when Eleanor had dismissed him based on assumptions rather than understanding. I never made the connection. When you walked into my office 6 months ago, I saw only what I expected to see, someone I'd already categorized and dismissed. I never thought to ask about your background, your experience, your character. I failed not just as a potential employer, but as Robert's daughter. Jake wanted to be angry, to point out how her prejudices had cost him opportunities and dignity. But looking across the table at Eleanor's obvious remorse, at the way her shoulders carried what seemed like years of accumulated guilt, he found that anger was the last thing he felt. He never mentioned having a daughter, adopted or otherwise. Eleanor smiled sadly, the expression transforming her face in ways her corporate mask never had. Robert was intensely private about his personal life. He believed that his team should see him as their captain, first to everything else second. He adopted me when I was 16 after my parents died in a car accident. He was my father's partner on the police force before joining the fire department. The pieces of the puzzle began falling into place for Jake. Eleanor's drive for success, her rigid standards, her apparent inability to see beyond surface impressions. She'd learned early that life could change in an instant, that security came from building walls high enough to keep uncertainty at bay. He wanted me to follow in his footsteps, but I was too afraid. After losing my birth parents so suddenly, the thought of deliberately putting myself in danger every day seemed impossible. So I chose the safest path I could think of: business school, corporate America. A world where risks could be calculated and managed. There's nothing wrong with choosing safety. Your father would have understood that. Eleanor nodded, but her expression suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. The night he died, he'd been talking about retirement, about wanting to spend more time with family, about being proud of what he'd built but ready to step back. He was planning to recommend you for promotion to lieutenant. The information hit Jake harder than he'd expected. Lieutenant Morrison. It would have meant better pay, more stability, a clearer path toward providing Emma with the life he dreamed of giving her. Instead, Captain Sterling's death had coincided with Jake's own injury, and both their futures had taken drastically different turns. I'm sorry you lost your mentor, your career, your opportunities. And I'm sorry that when you came to me for help, I made everything worse instead of honoring what Robert saw in you. Jake reached across the table, then covering Eleanor's hand with his own. Her skin was soft, unmarked by the kind of physical labor that had defined his adult life. But her grip was surprisingly strong when she held on. We can't change the past, but maybe we can do something about the future. Eleanor looked up at him with eyes that held hope and uncertainty in equal measure. What did you have in mind? Before Jake could answer, Eleanor pulled something from her purse, a manila envelope, thick and official-looking. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed it on the table between them. Robert left something for you, in his will. I only discovered it yesterday when I was going through his papers trying to understand why your name seemed so familiar. She paused, taking a shaky breath. I should have given this to you years ago, but I never knew where to find you. And then when you walked into my office, Jake stared at the envelope, his name written across the front in Captain Sterling's familiar block letters. The handwriting brought back a flood of memories: duty rosters, commendation forms, the encouraging note Robert had left on his locker after Jake's first successful high-rise rescue. I can't open this. It's not mine to read, but there's also this. Eleanor pulled out a smaller envelope, this one addressed to her in the same handwriting. He wrote me a letter too, asking me to find you if anything ever happened to him. I failed him, Jake. I failed you both. With unsteady fingers, Jake opened the larger envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a brief letter dated just 2 weeks before Captain Sterling's death, along with several official documents that made Jake's heart skip. Jake, if Eleanor is reading this to you, then I'm gone, and you're probably wondering why I left you these papers. The truth is, you're the best firefighter I've ever had the privilege to serve with. And more than that, you're a good man. Sarah always said you deserve more than the risks we took every day could offer, especially with little Emma depending on you. Jake's throat tightened at the mention of his late wife. Captain Sterling had been at Sarah's funeral, had stood quietly in the back while Jake had struggled to hold himself together for Emma's sake. I've recommended you for early pension benefits based on your service record and injury status. The paperwork is included here. It should provide enough monthly income to give you options. Maybe go back to school if you want, or start that contracting business you always talked about. I've also included a recommendation letter for the Fire Academy instructor position that's opening up next year. You have too much knowledge and experience to waste on the sidelines. Jake's hands shook as he examined the documents. Pension approvals instructor, recommendations, even a partial scholarship to a business management program at the local community college. All dated 10 years ago, all signed and processed, all somehow lost in the bureaucratic shuffle after Captain Sterling's death. There's more. Eleanor reached into her purse again. This time she produced a small velvet box, the kind that held something precious. He left this for Emma. Inside the box was a delicate gold locket engraved with the fire department emblem and Emma's initials. A folded note tucked beneath it read, "For Emma Morrison, daughter of a hero. May she always know how proud her father's captain was of the man who raised her." Jake closed his eyes, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had been kept from him for 10 years. The pension alone would have changed everything. No more scraping by paycheck to paycheck. No more watching Emma's face fall when he couldn't afford dance classes or the art supplies she'd wanted. The instructor position would have given him purpose, a way to pass on his knowledge while staying safe for his daughter's sake. Why didn't any of this reach me? Eleanor pulled out yet another document, this one bearing the letterhead of the fire department's administrative office. There was a clerical error. Your file was misfiled under your middle name after Robert's death. These documents sat in storage for years waiting for someone to claim them. No one thought to look. But there was something else in Eleanor's expression, a weight that suggested the story wasn't quite complete. When Jake pressed her gently, she finally revealed the full truth. My company handles the fire department's benefits administration, has for the past 8 years. When I took over as CEO 3 years ago, I should have audited the old files, should have caught the error. Instead, I was so focused on efficiency and cost cutting that I let it slide. The unclaimed benefits made our numbers look better. The revelation hit Jake like a physical blow. Not only had Eleanor personally denied him a job, but her negligence had cost him years of financial security that had rightfully been his. The irony was almost too bitter to comprehend. The woman he'd just risked his life to save had been unwittingly responsible for years of his family's struggle. For a long moment, Jake said nothing, processing the full scope of what had been taken from him. Emma's childhood lived in poverty when it didn't have to be. His own sense of worth eroded by years of rejection and failure. The opportunities lost, the dreams deferred, all because of bureaucratic incompetence and corporate indifference. I understand if you hate me. I understand if you can never forgive what I've done, both deliberately and through negligence. But I want to make it right, Jake. However I can, I want to make it right. Jake looked across the table at this woman who held so much power over his past and future. This person who had been both his salvation and his destruction. Her face was open now, vulnerable in a way he'd never seen before, stripped of the corporate armor that had defined their previous interactions. The pension, can it be reinstated? Eleanor nodded eagerly. With back payments, 10 years worth plus interest. It'll take some paperwork, but it's legally yours, always has been. And the instructor position, the current instructor is retiring next month. If you want it, it's yours. The pay is good, the benefits are excellent, and you'd be training the next generation of firefighters. Robert always said you had a gift for teaching. Jake felt something shift inside him, a loosening of the tight knot of resentment and disappointment he'd carried for so long. The practical part of his mind was already calculating the back pension would eliminate his debts, provide a college fund for Emma, maybe even allow them to move to a better neighborhood. The instructor job would give him purpose and security, a chance to honor Captain Sterling's memory while building a future for his daughter. But there was another part of him, the part that remembered the humiliation of that job interview, that wanted to make Eleanor understand the full cost of her prejudices. Not for revenge, but for something more important, genuine change. There's something else I need, something beyond money or jobs. Eleanor leaned forward, her attention completely focused. Anything, name it. I need you to understand what it's like to be judged by your appearance, your address, your education instead of your character. To have doors slammed in your face by people who never bothered to see who you really are. I need you to promise me that no one else will go through what I went through in your office." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, the first genuine emotion Jake had seen from her, beyond fear and regret. "I promise, I swear to you, Jake, I'll change how we hire, how we evaluate people. No more assumptions, no more prejudice. Robert would be ashamed of the person I became, but maybe I can still become the person he wanted me to be." Jake nodded, satisfied that her commitment was real. But as they sat there in the quiet diner surrounded by the ordinary sounds of coffee brewing and conversation, he realized that something unexpected was happening. Despite everything, the lost years, the financial hardship, the wounded pride, he was beginning to see Eleanor not as an enemy to be conquered, but as someone who had lost her way and was genuinely trying to find it again. Emma's dance recital is next Friday. 7 at the elementary school. She's been practicing for months and she's really good. Would you like to come? Eleanor's face transformed with surprise and something that looked like joy. "You'd want me there after everything." Captain Sterling always said that people deserve second chances, and Emma could use another person in the audience cheering for her. Fair warning, though, she'll probably want to talk your ear off about ballet technique and sequin costumes. For the first time since he'd known her, Eleanor laughed a real laugh, warm and unguarded. "I'd love to come. I haven't been to a children's performance well, ever. Thank you for inviting me." As they prepared to leave the diner, Eleanor hesitated at the door. "Jake, there's something else. Something I haven't told you about the fire investigation." Jake waited, sensing that whatever she was about to reveal would be significant. The electrical failure that started the fire wasn't random. The investigators found evidence of faulty wiring that should have been replaced years ago. The contractor who installed it cut corners, used substandard materials. "My insurance company has been covering up similar incidents for months to avoid liability. How many other people are at risk? Potentially hundreds. The same contractor worked on dozens of properties across the county. But my board of directors wants to settle quietly, avoid the bad publicity. They're talking about paying off the few people who've complained and hoping the rest never find out." Jake stared at Eleanor, understanding that she was asking for more than his forgiveness. She was asking for his help in doing what was right, even if it cost her company millions. "What are you going to do?" Eleanor straightened her shoulders, and for the first time Jake saw in her the strength that Captain Sterling must have recognized all those years ago. "I'm going to recommend full disclosure and proactive safety inspections for every property. It'll probably cost me my job, might bankrupt the company, but it's what Robert would have done. It's what you would do." Jake smiled, then a real smile that reached his eyes. "It's what we're going to do. Together." Second Chance Flames on Part 2. Discovery and Transformation. 1 week later, Jake stood in the administrative offices of Whitmore Insurance, feeling distinctly out of place among the gleaming glass and polished chrome. He'd worn his best shirt, a button-down that Emma had helped him iron that morning, but still felt the stares of perfectly groomed executives as he waited in the reception area. The leather couch beneath him probably cost more than 3 months of his rent. A young assistant approached her, professional smile never quite reaching her eyes. "Ms. Whitmore will see you now, Mr. Morrison. Would you like coffee or water before the meeting?" "No, thank you. I'm fine." Jake followed her through a maze of cubicles toward the executive suite. He couldn't help noticing how the atmosphere changed as they walked. Hushed voices, curious glances, the occasional whispered comment behind cupped hands. Word had apparently spread about his connection to the CEO, though he doubted anyone knew the full story. Eleanor's office was even more imposing than he remembered, a corner suite with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. Awards and certificates lined one wall, while another displayed framed photographs of Eleanor shaking hands with politicians and business leaders. Unlike her home office, there were no personal touches, here no hints of the woman behind the professional facade. Eleanor rose from behind her desk as he entered, extending her hand with a smile that seemed genuinely warm. "Jake, thank you for coming. Please have a seat." She dismissed her assistant with a nod, waiting until the door closed before speaking again. "I've been up half the night working on this. The pension reinstatement is already in process. I had our legal team expedite it. The back payments should be deposited in your account by the end of next week." She slid a folder across the desk toward him. "These are the details of the instructor position at the academy. The salary is higher than what I mentioned before I checked the current market rates for someone with your experience. There's also a signing bonus given the circumstances." Jake opened the folder, his eyes widening at the figures listed there. It was more money than he'd ever made, even at the height of his firefighting career. Enough to move Emma to a better school district, to finally give her the stability he'd been fighting for all these years. This is, this is generous, Eleanor. It's not generosity, Jake. It's what you're worth, what you've always been worth. Jake closed the folder, suddenly uncomfortable with the ease of it all. The transition from struggling plumber to financially secure instructor, happening too quickly, like winning a lottery he'd never entered. And what about the wiring issues, the safety concerns? Eleanor's expression tightened, professional armor sliding back into place. That's more complicated. I had our risk assessment team pull the data on all properties serviced by Cornerstone contractors over the past decade. The preliminary numbers are concerning potentially 347 residential properties and 89 commercial buildings, all with substandard electrical work. Jesus, that's hundreds of families at risk. Exactly. I presented the findings to the board yesterday. It didn't go well. Eleanor stood, moving to the window. For a moment, she stared out at the city below, shoulders tense beneath her tailored blazer. They voted 7-2 against full disclosure. The majority position is that we should handle complaints as they arise rather than create panic with a widespread alert. That's not just unethical, Eleanor, it's criminal. I know, but they're concerned about shareholder value, potential lawsuits, regulatory investigations. One board member actually suggested that if we notify everyone, we'd be admitting liability for damages we haven't even been sued for yet. So they're willing to let people die to protect profits. Eleanor turned back to face him, her expression a complex mix of frustration and determination. I have one more card to play. There's an emergency board meeting tomorrow morning. I'm presenting an alternative plan that would spread the financial impact over 5 years while still addressing the immediate safety concerns. I've been working with our financial team to show that the long-term brand damage from covering this up would far exceed the short-term costs of doing the right thing. And if they still say no, then I go public anyway. I've already drafted a press release. If the board won't approve it, I'll release it on my own. They'll fire you, almost certainly, and you're okay with that. Eleanor smiled, a small but genuine curve of her lips. 10 days ago, I wouldn't have been. My entire identity was wrapped up in this company and being its leader. But nearly dying in that fire, it changes your perspective. So does meeting the daughter of the man who saved you. She returned to her desk, opening a drawer to pull out a small framed photograph. She handed it to Jake, a younger Eleanor in graduation robes, standing beside Captain Sterling in his dress uniform. Both were smiling. This was taken when I finished business school. Robert was so proud, even though it wasn't the path he'd hoped I'd take. He told me that day that success wasn't measured by titles or money, but by the lives you touch along the way. I think I forgot that lesson somewhere between his funeral and my first executive position. Jake studied the photograph, struck by the softness in Captain Sterling's eyes as he looked at his adopted daughter. It was the same expression he'd seen countless times when the captain spoke about his team, about the citizens they protected. The look of a man who understood what truly mattered. He'd be proud of what you're doing now, standing up for what's right, even when it costs you something. I hope so. Eleanor reclaimed the photograph, returning it carefully to her desk drawer. There's something else I wanted to discuss. Something more personal. Jake waited, suddenly wary of the shift in tone. The investigators completed their report on the fire at my house. The electrical fault was definitely in the basement wiring near where you were working. But they also found something unusual. She slid another document across the desk, an official report with a fire department seal. The point of origin wasn't random. The wires had been deliberately cross-connected, creating a situation where failure was almost inevitable. Not immediately, but eventually. Someone tampered with that wiring, Jake, months or even years ago. You're saying it was deliberate, like arson? Not exactly. More like a time bomb. Set once and forgotten, designed to fail catastrophically when the right conditions occurred. The investigator said it was sophisticated work, someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Jake felt his firefighter instincts kicking in, the familiar process of analyzing a fire scene, looking for patterns and explanations. Any suspects? None yet, but I've been reviewing personnel records, looking for anyone with both access to my home and a grudge against me or the company. That could be a long list. Eleanor's laugh held no humor. Longer than I'd like to admit. I haven't exactly prioritized being well-liked over being successful, but this level of technical knowledge narrows things down. I'm working with a private investigator to follow up on some leads. She hesitated, studying Jake's face carefully. I'd like your help with this. Your expertise as a firefighter, your understanding of how fires spread. The investigators respect your background, and frankly, I trust your instincts more than theirs. I'm not sure how much help I'd be. I've been out of the field for years, but you still think like a firefighter. I saw it that night in the mansion, the way you assessed the situation, found the escape route, made split-second decisions that saved both our lives. That kind of instinct doesn't fade, Jake. It just needs the right opportunity to resurface. Jake considered the request. Working with Eleanor would mean diving back into a world he'd been forced to leave behind, reopening old wounds he'd fought hard to heal. But it would also mean using skills that had once defined him, that had given his life purpose beyond a paycheck. All right, I'll help, but my priority has to be Emma. The academy position starts in 2 weeks and I need to get her settled into a routine before then. Of course, family comes first. Robert taught me that, even if I haven't always lived by it. Speaking of which, is your invitation to Emma's recital still open? Jake was surprised by the hesitant note in Eleanor's voice, so different from her usual confidence. It's tomorrow night, 7 o'clock sharp. Emma's been practicing her solo every evening until bedtime. Pretty sure she's worn a hole in our living room carpet with all the twirling. I'll be there. As Jake prepared to leave, Eleanor walked him to the door of her office, pausing with her hand on the handle. Jake, I want you to know, regardless of what happens with the board tomorrow, I'm grateful for this second chance. To make things right, yes, but also to understand what Robert saw in you, what I should have seen from the beginning. For the first time since entering the imposing building, Jake felt truly at ease. Not because of the promised money or position, but because of the genuine connection forming between them, a bridge across worlds that had seemed impossibly distant just days ago. Sometimes it takes a fire to see what's really important. I'll see you tomorrow night, Eleanor. The elementary school auditorium hummed with excitement as parents, siblings, and grandparents filed in, clutching programs and flowers for their young performers. Jake found seats near the front, saving a space for Eleanor, while checking his watch repeatedly. Emma had been vibrating with nervousness backstage, her small hands fidgeting with the sequins on her costume. Daddy is your special friend, really coming. The lady from the big house. She promised she would, sweetheart. Will she like my dancing? Ms. Abernathy says my arabesque needs work. She'll love it. You're going to be the star of the show. Emma had beamed at that confidence, momentarily overriding anxiety as she rejoined her classmates for final preparations. Now, with only minutes until curtain time, Jake scanned the filling auditorium for any sign of Eleanor. He told himself it didn't matter. Eleanor was busy, important, probably delayed by the emergency board meeting. He shouldn't have expected her to prioritize a children's dance recital over a multi-million-dollar corporate crisis. Is this seat taken? Eleanor stood in the aisle, slightly breathless, holding a small bouquet of pink roses. She traded her business attire for a simple blue dress, her hair falling loose around her shoulders, instead of pulled back in its usual severe style. I was beginning to think you wouldn't make it. The board meeting ran long, very long. She slid into the seat beside him, arranging the flowers carefully on her lap. How did it go? Eleanor's expression was unreadable for a moment, then broke into a smile that transformed her entire face. We won. 9-0 for full disclosure and immediate safety inspections. It took 7 hours of debate, financial projections, and one very impassioned speech about corporate responsibility, but they finally agreed that protecting lives had to take priority over protecting the bottom line. 9-0, I thought you said most of them were against it. They were, until I showed them the fire investigation report from my house. Once they understood this wasn't just about faulty wiring, but potentially deliberate sabotage, the calculus changed. Suddenly, the risk of being seen as negligent in the face of known dangers became greater than the risk of proactive disclosure. That's incredible, Eleanor. Congratulations. Thank you, but tonight isn't about business. Tonight is about Emma, and I wouldn't have missed it for anything. The lights dimmed, kicking off further conversation as the principal stepped onto the stage to welcome everyone to the annual spring recital. Jake felt an unexpected swell of emotion as he watched Eleanor lean forward slightly, her attention completely focused on the stage where the youngest dancers were now filing out in their butterfly costumes. Emma's class was third in the program, a group of 7-year-olds in sparkly blue tutus, performing a simplified version of the Waltz of the Flowers. Jake spotted his daughter immediately third from the left, her face a mask of concentration as she carefully matched her movements to the music. When her solo moment came, a brief 8-count turn sequence, center stage, Jake held his breath. She's remarkable. Eleanor's whispered comment caught Jake by surprise. He turned to find Eleanor watching Emma with genuine appreciation, a soft smile playing at her lips. The way she carries herself, there's such grace there, Such poise. She gets that from her mother. Sarah was a dancer in college before she switched to nursing. The rest of the recital passed in a blur of proud parent moments and polite applause for other people's children. When the final curtain call came, Emma beamed from the stage, her eyes scanning the audience until she found Jake. Her smile widened as she spotted him, then shifted to curious delight when she noticed Eleanor beside him. Backstage was chaos, excited children, harried parents, teachers trying to organize costume returns amid the celebration. Jake navigated the crowd with practiced ease, finding Emma near the water fountain, still in her performance makeup and tutu. "Daddy, did you see my solo? I didn't mess up once." Jake scooped her into his arms, twirling her around as she giggled. "You were the best dancer on that stage, princess. I'm so proud of you." "Did your friend come, the lady you told me about?" "I did." Eleanor stepped forward, offering the bouquet with a formality that seemed oddly touching. "These are for you, Emma. You danced beautifully tonight." Emma accepted the flowers with wide eyes, burying her nose in the blooms before looking up at Eleanor with unabashed curiosity. "Are you really the lady whose house was on fire? Daddy said you were very brave." "Your daddy is the brave one. He saved my life." "That's because he used to be a firefighter. He was the best one ever." "Yes, he was. Your grandfather, my dad, used to say your daddy could see through smoke better than anyone." Emma's brow furrowed in confusion. "But I don't have a grandpa." Jake set Emma down gently, kneeling to meet her at eye level. "Remember how I told you about Captain Sterling, the firefighter who was my boss when I first started? It turns out he was Eleanor's dad. He adopted her when she was a teenager." Emma processed this information with the serious consideration only a 7-year-old could muster. "So, she's like your fire sister." Jake laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "Something like that, sweetheart. Did you bring the thing?" Eleanor nodded, reaching into her purse to withdraw the velvet box Jake had seen at the diner. "Emma, this is something my father, Captain Sterling, wanted you to have. He left it for you a long time ago, but we only just found it." Emma accepted the box with uncharacteristic solemnity, her small fingers tracing the embossed pattern before carefully opening the lid. The gold locket gleamed under the fluorescent lights of the school hallway, its engraved surface catching the light. "It's so pretty." "May I?" At Emma's nod, Eleanor removed the locket from its satin nest, gently fastening it around the girl's neck. The pendant rested just below Emma's collarbone, seeming to belong there as if it had always been meant for her. "It has your initials on it, CEM Emma Morrison, and the firefighter symbol because you come from a family of heroes." Emma's fingers touched the locket reverently. "Can I open it?" "Of course, there's a small catch on the side." Inside the locket was a tiny photograph Jake in his firefighter gear, smiling proudly beside Captain Sterling, after a particularly challenging rescue. Both men looked younger, unburdened by the tragedies that would later reshape their lives. "That's you, Daddy and Captain Sterling. It was taken on my first day as a full-fledged firefighter. Captain Sterling had just officially welcomed me to the team." "You look happy." "I was. It was one of the best days of my life." Eleanor watched the exchange with a wistful expression, her own memories of Robert Sterling clearly surfacing. He kept that photo in his wallet, said it reminded him of why they did the job, not just to save lives, but to build a brotherhood that could weather any storm. Emma closed the locket carefully, then looked up at Eleanor with the direct gaze of childhood. "Thank you for my necklace, and for coming to my dance. Would you like to come to our house for ice cream? Daddy always gets me ice cream after my recitals." Jake started to intervene, not wanting to pressure Eleanor into extending what had already been a long day. "Sweetheart, I'm sure Eleanor has other plans. Actually, ice cream sounds perfect. If you're sure it's not too late. It's a special occasion. Bedtime rules are suspended on recital nights." As they walked toward the parking lot, Emma skipped ahead, occasionally stopping to twirl or practice a movement from her performance. "She's extraordinary, Jake. So full of life and confidence. You've done an amazing job raising her. Some days I wonder if I'm doing anything right. Single parenting isn't exactly what I planned for. But you keep showing up. That's what matters." They reached Jake's truck, an aging Ford with faded paint and a dent in the passenger door. Jake felt a moment of embarrassment as he compared it to what must be Eleanor's usual transportation. "It's not much, but it gets us where we need to go. You can follow us to the house if you'd like. It's about 15 minutes from here." "Actually, I took a cab. My car's still in the shop after... Well, the garage was attached to the house, so..." "Right, of course. Well, you're welcome to ride with us then. It's a bit cramped, but it's perfect. Thank you." The ride to Jake's apartment was filled with Emma's excited chatter about the recital, her classmates' performances, and her teacher's praise for her improving technique. Eleanor listened with genuine interest, asking questions that delighted Emma with their specificity. How long have you been taking ballet, Emma? 2 years. I started when I was 5. Daddy worked extra jobs so I could take classes. Jake felt his cheeks warm at the casual revelation of their financial struggles, but Eleanor simply nodded. That shows real dedication from both of you. The best things in life usually require sacrifice. Daddy says that too. He says we have to save up for the important things like dance class and college. Your daddy is very wise. Jake's apartment building was in a working-class neighborhood, not the worst area of town, but far from the manicured estates where Eleanor normally had moved. The 3-story brick structure had seen better days, its faded facade and cracked sidewalks speaking of perpetually delayed maintenance. It's not much, Jake said as he parked in one of the numbered spots. But the neighbors are decent, and the school bus stops right out front. It's a home, Eleanor replied simply. That's what matters. The apartment itself was small but meticulously neat, a living room that flowed into a compact kitchen with 2 bedrooms and a single bathroom down a short hallway. What the space lacked in size, Jake had made up for in thoughtful touches. Framed photographs lined one wall, mostly of Emma at various ages. A bookshelf overflowed with children's titles and the occasional firefighting manual. Emma's artwork adorned the refrigerator, held in place by colorful magnets. Ice cream time. Can we have sprinkles too, Daddy? It's a special night, isn't it? I think sprinkles are definitely called for. As Jake moved to the kitchen to prepare their dessert, Eleanor found herself drawn to the photographs on the wall. Among them was a wedding picture of Jake in a simple suit, his arm around a slender woman with Emma's same delicate features and warm smile. Sarah was beautiful. Jake paused in his scooping, glancing at the photograph with a familiar mix of love and loss. Yes, she was, inside and out. How long were you married? 5 years. Emma was only 2 when the accident happened. Drunk driver ran a red light on Sarah's way home from a night shift at the hospital. She never even saw it coming. I'm so sorry, Jake. The hardest part was explaining to Emma why Mommy wasn't coming home. How do you make a toddler understand something like that when you can barely understand it yourself? But you did. You've given Emma a wonderful life, a sense of security and happiness that many children with 2 parents don't have. Jake finished preparing the ice cream vanilla with chocolate sauce and rainbow sprinkles, arranging the bowls on a tray with a practiced hand. I've done my best. Some days that doesn't feel like enough. From where I'm standing, it looks like more than enough. Emma claimed the largest bowl with a triumphant grin, settling cross-legged on the living room floor to enjoy her treat. Jake and Eleanor took seats on the worn but comfortable couch, a respectful distance between them. This is nice, Eleanor said after a moment. Just being in a real home, sharing a simple pleasure like ice cream after a special event. My life doesn't have many moments like this. No family of your own. Eleanor shook her head, her expression carefully neutral. Never married, never seemed to find the time between education and career building. Robert used to tease me about it, said I needed to remember there was life outside the office. He was right. I know that now. I think I've always known it, just pushed it aside. Easier to focus on quarterly reports than to admit you're lonely. The admission hung in the air between them, unexpectedly vulnerable from a woman who had built her life around projecting strength and confidence. Daddy, can I show Eleanor my room? I want her to see my ballet posters. Jake smiled at his daughter's enthusiasm. If Eleanor would like to see them, that's fine. But remember, it's getting late and you've had a big day. I'd love to see your room, Emma. Emma led Eleanor down the hallway with the importance of a museum curator preparing to reveal a prized exhibit. Jake watched them go, struck by the naturalness of the scene, his daughter's small hand clasped trustingly in Eleanor's elegant one, both heads bent together as Emma explained something with animated gestures. He used the moment alone to clear the ice cream bowls, wiping down the kitchen counter and organizing tomorrow's lunch supplies for Emma's school day. When Eleanor and Emma hadn't returned after 15 minutes, Jake made his way down the hallway, curious about the extended tour. He found them sitting on Emma's bed, surrounded by stuffed animals and ballet memorabilia. Eleanor was carefully braiding Emma's hair, her fingers moving with surprising dexterity as she wove the long strands into an intricate pattern. My mom used to braid my hair like this before she died, Eleanor was saying softly. It was our special time together, just the 2 of us. She taught me how to do all kinds of fancy braids. Did you feel really sad when she died, like there was a big hole inside you? Jake froze in the doorway, holding his breath at Emma's direct question. They talked about Sarah's death many times over the years, but Emma rarely discussed her feelings of loss with strangers. Yes, exactly like that, Eleanor replied, her voice gentle but not condescending. A hole that nothing else seemed to fill. For a long time I was angry, too angry that she was gone, angry that everyone else got to keep their mothers. It didn't seem fair. I get angry sometimes too, especially when the other girls have their moms at dance recitals. Daddy tries really hard, but he doesn't know how to do ballet buns right. It's a special skill, Eleanor agreed, securing the end of Emma's braid with a hair tie from her wrist. Maybe I could teach your dad sometime, or if it's okay with both of you, I could come help on your next recital day. Emma twisted around, her expression brightening. Really, you'd do that? I'd be honored. If your dad approves, of course. Jake cleared his throat, alerting them to his presence. That sounds like a very kind offer, but it's getting late and someone has school tomorrow. Can Eleanor read me my bedtime story tonight, please, Daddy? Jake looked to Eleanor, not wanting to pressure her into extending what had already been a lengthy visit. I'd be happy to if it's all right with your father. One story, Jake agreed. Then it's lights out, young lady. Emma selected a well-worn picture book from her shelf, handing it to Eleanor, with the solemnity of passing along a sacred text. This was my mom's favorite to read to me. Daddy says she did all the voices. Eleanor accepted the book, The Paper Bag Princess, a tale of a resourceful girl who outwits a dragon with appropriate reverence. I'll do my best with the voices, but I may need some coaching. Jake retreated to the doorway, watching as Eleanor settled beside Emma on the narrow bed, opening the book to its first colorful page. Her voice, usually so precise and businesslike, softened into the cadence of storytelling, rising and falling, with the adventure-changing tone for each character. Emma's eyes grew heavy by the story's end, her small body curling trustingly against Eleanor's side. When the last page was turned, Eleanor carefully extracted herself, tucking the blankets around Emma's shoulders with natural ease. Good night, Emma. Thank you for sharing your special day with me. Good night. Will you come back again? If you and your dad would like me to. You do good voices. Jake stepped forward to kiss his daughter's forehead, turning on her small nightlight before guiding Eleanor back to the living room. You're a natural with her. Eleanor smiled, a hint of sadness touching her eyes. Children are honest. They respond to genuine interest, not credentials or titles. It's refreshing after spending my days with people who calculate the advantage of every interaction. Jake glanced at his watch, surprised to find it was nearly 11 o'clock. It's late. Let me call you a cab. Actually, I took the liberty of arranging for my driver to pick me up. He should be downstairs in about 10 minutes, if that's all right. Of course. A slightly awkward silence fell between them, the evening drawing to its natural conclusion, but both seemingly reluctant to end it. Jake, I wanted to thank you, not just for including me tonight, but for allowing me into your life at all. After everything that's happened, everything I did and failed to do, you'd have every right to shut the door in my face. But then I'd miss out on seeing who you really are. Beyond the CEO, beyond the boardroom power player, the person Robert Sterling raised. Eleanor's eyes glistened with unshed tears, the emotion catching her by surprise. I'm not sure I know who that is anymore. I've spent so long being what the company needed, what the shareholders expected, that I've lost track of the rest. Maybe that's the real gift in all of this. A chance for both of us to rediscover who we are when the labels fall away. When we're not defined by our jobs or bank accounts or the expectations of others. Eleanor's phone buzzed with a text notification. My driver's here. Jake walked her to the door, holding it open as she stepped into the hallway. The academy called today, he said suddenly. I start orientation on Monday. They're excited to have someone with my field experience joining the faculty. That's wonderful, Jake. They're lucky to have you. I'd never have had the opportunity without you finding those documents, without you fighting for what's right. We all have our moments of courage. Some of us just need a burning building to find them. Her smile took any sting from the words, transforming them into a shared understanding of how quickly life could change course. I'll call you tomorrow about the fire investigation. The private investigator has some leads I'd like your opinion on. I'll be here, well after school drop-off and before pickup. Single dad schedule, of course. Good night, Jake, and thank you again for everything. As Eleanor disappeared down the stairwell, Jake found himself standing in the doorway longer than necessary, listening to the fading sound of her footsteps. Something had shifted between them tonight, a connection forming that went beyond obligation or gratitude. Something that felt against all odds, like the beginning of friendship. He closed the door, moving through the quiet apartment to check on Emma one last time before bed. She was sound asleep, one hand curled protectively around the locket at her throat, her braids still perfectly intact across her pillow. Jake adjusted her blanket, then gently touched the golden pendant that connected them all. His daughter, his former captain, and now Eleanor. Three lives intersecting in ways none of them could have predicted. A rescue that had saved more than just lives. A second chance that was rapidly becoming something none of them had expected. The next morning dawned with unexpected purpose. As Jake prepared Emma's breakfast and packed her lunch, his mind kept returning to the fire investigation, to the deliberate tampering with the electrical system in Eleanor's home. His firefighter instincts, dormant for years, buzzed with questions and theories. "Daddy, you're burning the toast." Jake snapped back to the present, rescuing the slightly charred bread from the toaster with a rueful smile. "Sorry, Princess. I was thinking about something important." "About Eleanor? She's nice. I like her hair." "I was thinking about her house, actually. About why it caught fire." "Because bad wires, right? That's what you told me." "Yes, but someone made those wires bad on purpose. Someone who wanted to hurt Eleanor or scare her." Emma considered this with a child's direct logic. "That's mean. Why would someone do that?" "That's what I'm going to help Eleanor figure out. Some people get angry when they don't get what they want or when they think life isn't fair. Like Billy Cooper when he doesn't get picked for kickball." Jake laughed, ruffling his daughter's hair. "Something like that, but much more serious. Grown-ups should know better than to hurt others when they're upset." "But they don't always, do they?" "No, sweetheart, they don't always." After dropping Emma at school, Jake drove to the address Eleanor had texted him that morning, a small, unassuming office in a professional building downtown. The sign on the frosted glass door read Mercer Investigations in simple black lettering. Inside, Jake found Eleanor already seated across from a lean, gray-haired man with the watchful eyes of someone who noticed everything. "Jake, this is Daniel Mercer, former arson investigator with 20 years experience before he opened his private practice." "Daniel, this is Jake Morrison, the firefighter I told you about." Mercer extended a weathered hand, his grip firm, but not challenging. "Captain Sterling spoke highly of you back in the day. Said you had the best instincts on the force." "You knew the captain. Worked a dozen major fires with him over the years. He had a nose for when something wasn't right. Sounds like you do too." Eleanor gestured to the array of photographs and documents spread across Mercer's desk. "I've briefed Daniel on everything we know so far. The tampered wiring, the timing of the fire, the insurance complications. He's been investigating potential suspects." Mercer nodded, pulling a folder from a stack at his elbow. "Based on access to the property and technical knowledge required, I've narrowed it down to 3 possibilities." He opened the folder, revealing personnel files with attached photographs. First, Marcus Donovan, electrical contractor who worked on a renovation at the Whitmore estate 2 years ago. His company lost a major insurance contract with Ms. Whitmore's firm 6 months later, nearly bankrupting him. "I remember him," Eleanor said. "He underbid the project, then tried to cut corners on materials. When our inspectors caught it, he became verbally abusive, threatened to make me regret canceling his contract." "Empty threats are common in business disputes," Mercer acknowledged. "But Donovan has a history of vindictive behavior. 2 restraining orders from former business partners, 1 complaint of vandalism that was later dropped." "What about his technical knowledge?" Jake asked, studying the man's photograph. "Rewiring to create a delayed failure point is specialized work. He's a licensed master electrician, perfectly capable of the kind of tampering we saw." "Who else?" Mercer slid forward a second file. "Gregory Winters, former risk assessment manager at Whitmore Insurance, fired 3 years ago for falsifying inspection reports." "I remember him too," Eleanor said grimly. "He was approving buildings that should have failed inspection, taking bribes from property developers to look the other way on code violations." "He'd have both motive and opportunity," Mercer continued. "Access to the house during company events, knowledge of the electrical systems from his inspection background, and a serious grudge against Miss Whitmore for ending his career." "And the third suspect?" Jake asked. Mercer hesitated, glancing at Eleanor before opening the final file. "This one's more personal. James Whitmore, Ms. Whitmore's ex-husband." Jake's surprise must have shown on his face because Eleanor gave a small, humorless smile. "Brief marriage in my 20s. Ended badly when I discovered he'd only been interested in my family connections and potential inheritance." "Mr. Whitmore contested the divorce settlement vigorously," Mercer explained. "Court records show he made numerous claims against the estate, including the mansion. All were rejected, but he continued legal challenges for years afterward." "What makes him a suspect beyond the obvious grudge?" Jake asked. "He's an architectural engineer with extensive knowledge of older homes like the Whitmore estate. He's also been observed driving past the property multiple times in recent months, despite a court order to stay at least 500 feet away. Jake studied the three files, his mind working through the possibilities with the methodical approach he'd used analyzing fire scenes. Opportunity, motive, technical ability, he murmured. All three have them, but the method tells us something important about the perpetrator. What do you mean? Eleanor asked. This wasn't an impulsive act. Whoever did this was patient calculating. They didn't want immediate destruction or even discovery. They wanted you to feel safe in a house that was actually a ticking time bomb. Psychological warfare, Mercer agreed. Make the victim feel vulnerable in their own sanctuary. Which narrows our focus, Jake continued. Someone who wanted you to suffer not just financially but emotionally. Someone who knew the house meant something to you beyond its monetary value. That would point more toward James or Gregory, Eleanor said slowly. Both knew my personal attachment to the house. Marcus was purely a business relationship he never saw beyond the contract and the bottom line. Jake picked up the photograph of the tampered wiring, studying it with a professional eye. There's something else. The way this was done, it's almost signature work. Too perfect, too precise, like someone showing off their technical expertise. Leaving a calling card, Mercer suggested. Exactly, not just malice, but pride. Look what I can do that you can't even detect. That sounds like James, Eleanor said quietly. He always needed to be the smartest person in the room to prove his superiority. But he'd also be the most obvious suspect, Jake pointed out. The bitter ex-husband is always the first person investigators look at. Unless that's part of the plan, Mercer interjected. Hide in plain sight. Count on his obvious motive to seem too convenient. Or it could be misdirection. Jake said, a new thought forming. What if we're looking at this backward? What if the fire wasn't meant to harm Eleanor at all, but to damage Whitmore Insurance by creating a high-profile claim that exposes the faulty wiring issue? Eleanor sat straighter, her expression sharpening. The timing would match. The board was already discussing the Cornerstone contractor liability issues internally. A major fire at the CEO's own home would force the conversation into the public domain. Who at your company knew about the contractor problems before the fire? Jake asked. The risk management team, obviously, the legal department, a few board members who serve on the compliance committee. Anyone with a personal grudge. Someone who might have been passed over for promotion or felt undervalued. Eleanor's brow furrowed in concentration. There was one, Victor Hayes, Deputy Chief of Risk Management. He expected to be promoted to department head last year, but I brought in someone from outside with more digital security experience. He's been vocally resentful ever since. Would he have access to your home? Yes, there was a company retreat there 6 months ago. All department heads and their deputies were invited. And technical knowledge. His background is in structural engineering with a specialty in electrical systems. Before joining Whitmore, he worked for the city building inspector's office. Mercer was already typing the name into his computer, pulling up employment records and background information. Victor Hayes, 47, divorced, no children, with Whitmore Insurance for 12 years, previously employed by Metropolitan Building Safety Commission for 8 years. Master's degree in electrical engineering from State University. Does he have any connection to Cornerstone contractors? Jake asked. Mercer typed further, his eyes scanning the screen. Interesting. He was the city inspector who originally approved their licensing application 15 years ago. And this is noteworthy. His brother-in-law from his former marriage is Thomas Sutton, owner of Westside Electric, Cornerstone's main competitor. So exposing Cornerstone's faulty work would benefit his former family connection, Jake said, the pieces falling into place. And damage the woman who passed him over for promotion, Eleanor added, her voice tight with controlled anger. It's all while creating a major safety initiative that he could potentially lead, rehabilitating his career prospects. It fits, Mercer agreed, but proving it will be challenging. This kind of sabotage is difficult to trace directly to the perpetrator without witnesses or physical evidence. What about access records? Jake suggested. Security cameras at the estate, visitor logs, that sort of thing. The security system was upgraded last year, Eleanor confirmed. There should be footage of everyone who entered the property in the months before the fire. And the retreat you mentioned, would Hayes have had opportunities to slip away from the group access areas of the house that weren't part of the official tour? Absolutely. It was a full-day event with multiple breakout sessions throughout the house. People were constantly moving between rooms, and the basement level was used for storage of presentation materials. Perfect cover. Mercer nodded. He could have easily spent 10 minutes rewiring without anyone noticing his absence. We need to review that security footage, Jake said. and check his financial records. If he's connected to his former brother-in-law's company, there might be unusual payments or benefits flowing between them. I'll get on it immediately, Mercer promised. Ms. Whitmore, can you authorize access to the security archives? Already texting my head of security. He'll provide whatever you need. As Mercer made calls and sent emails to begin the deeper investigation, Jake found himself studying Eleanor's expression, determined, focused, but with an undercurrent of hurt that she was clearly trying to conceal. Are you all right? She met his eyes, her professional mask slipping just enough to reveal the personal impact of their discoveries. I've always known that business creates enemies, that decisions I make affect people's livelihoods, their sense of self-worth. But to think someone would go this far, would risk innocent lives just to advance their career or settle a score. It says more about them than about you, Eleanor. Does it, or does it say something about the culture I've created? A company where ambition and technical competence are valued above character and integrity. The question hung between them, carrying weight beyond the immediate investigation. Maybe it's both, Jake said gently. Maybe this is an opportunity to reevaluate more than just safety protocols. Eleanor nodded, a new resolve settling into her features. First, we prove who did this. Then we make sure it never happens again on every level. As Mercer returned with updates on his initial inquiries, Jake felt a familiar tension in his shoulders, the same readiness that had carried him into countless burning buildings, that had guided him through life and death decisions in seconds rather than minutes. For the first time since his injury had ended his firefighting career, he felt truly useful, truly himself. The investigation was just beginning, but already it had ignited something he'd thought lost forever. Purpose beyond survival, meaning beyond a paycheck. And looking at Eleanor's determined expression, he suspected he wasn't the only one being transformed by fire's aftermath. Second Chance Flames. Part 3, Transformation and Resolution. 3 weeks passed in a blur of activity. Jake settled into his new role at the Fire Academy, his experience and practical knowledge quickly earning the respect of both colleagues and students. The back pension payments had transformed his financial situation overnight, allowing him to move Emma to a better apartment in a neighborhood with parks and a top-rated elementary school. For the first time in years, he wasn't living paycheck to paycheck, constantly calculating which bill could be delayed another week. Meanwhile, Eleanor had become a regular presence in their lives. She'd helped them move into the new apartment, arriving in designer clothes, but not hesitating to carry boxes and assemble furniture. She'd taken Emma shopping for bedroom decorations, returning with the perfect ballet-themed curtains and a hand-painted jewelry box for the gold locket. Most surprisingly, she'd started joining them for Sunday dinners, a tradition Jake had maintained even through the leanest times when the special meal had been little more than pasta with jarred sauce. The investigation into the mansion fire had continued, with Daniel Mercer methodically building a case against Victor Hayes. Security footage had confirmed Hayes' presence in the basement during the company retreat, with a suspicious 18-minute gap where he couldn't be accounted for. Financial records showed irregular payments from his former brother-in-law's electrical company channeled through an offshore account. The evidence was circumstantial but compelling. On this particular morning, Jake stood before his first full class at the academy, 24 recruits watching him with expressions ranging from eager anticipation to skeptical assessment. He recognized both reactions had warned them himself during his own training years ago. Fire doesn't care about your credentials, doesn't care about your background, your education, or your good intentions. Fire respects only one thing: reality. Jake moved between the rows of seats, making eye contact with each recruit. You can have all the theoretical knowledge in the world, but if you can't apply it in a real crisis with smoke blinding you and heat searing your lungs, it's worthless. That's why this course balances classroom learning with practical scenarios. So when it matters most, your instincts will be aligned with your knowledge. A hand raised near the back, a young woman with close-cropped hair and intense focus. Sir, is it true you went back into a burning mansion to save someone who'd rejected you for a job that seems to contradict basic safety protocols? Jake paused, surprised by the question. News of his rescue of Eleanor had apparently spread through the department grapevine. The situation you're referring to involved unique circumstances. But yes, I made a risk assessment and determined the rescue was viable. Sometimes our job requires split-second decisions where protocol meets human judgment. But sir, how do you know when to follow procedure and when to trust your gut? It was a good question, better than she knew. Jake considered his answer carefully, aware that his words would shape these recruits' approach to life and death situations. The purpose of training isn't to replace instinct with rules. It's to align your instincts with sound principles. So when you have to make those split-second choices, you're drawing on both. Captain Sterling, my former commanding officer, used to say that a good firefighter knows the rules, but a great firefighter knows when the situation demands more. The mention of Captain Sterling brought Eleanor to mind. They had dinner plans that evening to discuss the latest developments in the Hayes investigation. Over the past weeks, their relationship had evolved into something neither had anticipated: a friendship built on shared purpose and growing mutual respect. Today we're starting with fire behavior in contained structures. Understanding how fire moves, feeds, and breathes is the foundation of everything else we'll cover. By the time we're done, you'll be able to read a burning building like a book, knowing where the fire's been, where it's going, and how to stay one step ahead. As Jake launched into his lecture, he felt a quiet confidence he hadn't experienced in years. This wasn't just a job, it was a calling, a way to honor Captain Sterling's legacy while building something new for himself and Emma. That evening, Jake waited at a small Italian restaurant downtown, checking his watch as the minutes ticked past their agreed meeting time. Eleanor was usually punctual to a fault, her corporate habits deeply ingrained. Her tardiness was unusual enough to prompt concern. When she finally arrived 15 minutes late, her expression confirmed something was wrong. Though perfectly composed in her tailored suit, her eyes held a tension that Jake had learned to recognize. "Sorry I'm late. The board meeting ran long." "Everything okay?" Eleanor signaled the waiter for a glass of wine before answering. "Victor Hayes has resigned effective immediately, cited personal reasons, and declined exit interviews. He knows we're on to him." "Almost certainly. Mercer thinks someone at the security office may have tipped him off about the footage review. So he's running." "It appears that way." His resignation letter was brief but meticulously crafted to admit nothing while preventing any further investigation by the company. "Our legal team says it's essentially bulletproof against internal action." The waiter returned with Eleanor's wine and took their dinner orders, momentarily interrupting the conversation. When he departed, Eleanor leaned forward, her voice dropping to ensure privacy. "There's more. Hayes has been seen meeting with James Whitmore, my ex-husband, 3 times in the past week at an out-of-the-way bar in the warehouse district." "You think they're working together?" "It's possible. James always had a talent for manipulating others to do his dirty work. He could have recognized Hayes' resentment and encouraged it, maybe even suggested the specific method of sabotage." "But why? What does your ex gain from a fire at your house?" Eleanor's fingers tightened around her wine-glass knuckles, whitening slightly. "The house was originally part of James's family estate. When we married, his parents transferred the deed to us jointly. After the divorce, I bought out his share at twice the market value to end his claims on the property. He never forgave me for keeping what he considered his birthright. So this was about revenge, and with the house damaged beyond repair, insurance would pay out, I'd likely sell the land, and James could potentially buy it back through a shell corporation. He'd reclaim his family legacy while watching me lose mine. That's elaborate and risky. James always did have a flair for the dramatic, and he never considered consequences, not for himself and certainly not for others." Jake studied Eleanor's expression, recognizing the controlled anger beneath her professional demeanor. "What happens now if Hayes has resigned and there's no smoking gun connecting him directly to the sabotage?" "Mercer is continuing his investigation, focusing on building a criminal case rather than an internal one. He's working with a contact at the police department to obtain warrants for Hayes' financial records and communications. And in the meantime," Eleanor took a measured sip of her wine, her decision already made. "In the meantime, we proceed with the safety inspection initiative. Whatever Hayes' motives, the danger to homeowners with faulty wiring remains real. The first round of notices goes out tomorrow, over 300 households who may be at risk." "That's good, Eleanor. Whatever else happens, you're doing the right thing." "I keep thinking about what might have happened if you hadn't been there that night. If you'd chosen to leave the house when the fire started, as anyone else would have. If you'd decided I wasn't worth the risk." The vulnerability in her voice caught Jake by surprise. Throughout the investigation, Eleanor had maintained her focus on facts and solutions, rarely acknowledging the personal trauma of nearly dying in her own home. "But I was there, and I made the choice I did. Everything else is just smoke." A small smile touched Eleanor's lips at his choice of metaphor. "Speaking of smoke, how was your first full day of classes?" Jake accepted the change of subject, recognizing Eleanor's need to reestablish emotional equilibrium. Better than expected, the recruits are sharp, asking good questions, challenging assumptions. One of them even brought up the mansion rescue. You're becoming a legend in your own time, Lieutenant Morrison. Hardly. But it feels good to be back in that world, to have something valuable to offer beyond physical labor. You've always had value beyond your labor, Jake. Some of us just took too long to recognize it. Their dinner arrived momentarily, pausing the conversation. As they ate, the discussion shifted to lighter topics. Emma's progress in school, Jake's new apartment, Eleanor's plans to rebuild on the mansion property. I've been thinking about a different design, she said, twirling pasta around her fork. Something more modern, more open, less mausoleum and more actual home. That sounds like a good change. The insurance adjuster nearly had a stroke when I mentioned demolishing what remains of the original structure. Apparently it had significant historical value despite the fire damage. But it's your decision in the end. Yes, and I think Robert would approve. He always said I should build something for the future instead of preserving the past. As their meal concluded, Eleanor checked her watch with a regretful expression. I should get going. Early meeting tomorrow with the communications team about the safety notices. Of course, I need to pick up Emma from her playdate anyway. They walked together to the restaurant entrance, the evening air cool against their skin. Eleanor's driver waited at the curb, engine idling. Jake, there's something else I wanted to discuss about Emma. What about her? Her birthday is coming up next month, isn't it? She mentioned it last time I visited, something about turning 8 being a big deal. Jake smiled, remembering Emma's earnest explanation of how 8 was practically grown up, not like 7 at all. May 15th, and yes, according to Emma, 8 is the pinnacle of childhood achievement. I'd like to do something special for her. With your permission, of course. You don't need to do that, Eleanor. You've already been incredibly generous with your time, and I want to. Not out of obligation, but because she matters to me. You both do. The simple declaration hung between them, laden with meanings neither was quite ready to fully examine. What did you have in mind? The City Ballet is performing Swan Lake that weekend. I know the artistic director. I could arrange box seats, a backstage tour, maybe even a short meeting with the principal dancers. Jake's immediate instinct was to politely decline to protect his independence, to avoid further indebtedness. But he thought of Emma's face if she had such an opportunity, the pure joy it would bring her. She would love that, absolutely love it. Then it's settled? I'll make the arrangements. Eleanor's driver opened the car door, waiting patiently. Good night, Jake. I'll call you when Mercer has updates. Good night, Eleanor. As the sleek black car pulled away from the curb, Jake found himself standing on the sidewalk longer than necessary, watching until it disappeared around a corner. The evening had left him with an unfamiliar sensation, not quite contentment, but something close. A sense that his life, so long defined by struggle and survival, was expanding to include new possibilities. The next morning brought an unexpected development. Jake was reviewing training materials in his office when his phone buzzed with Eleanor's number. Eleanor, what's up? Jake, I need you to come to the office now. Hayes sent something you need to see. The urgency in her voice eliminated any question of delay. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Eleanor met him in the lobby of Whitmore Insurance, her usual poise noticeably strained. Without explanation, she led him to a private conference room where Daniel Mercer already waited, a laptop open before him. Hayes sent this email 30 minutes, Eleanor explained, gesturing to the screen. To me, the board of directors, and several local news outlets simultaneously. Jake leaned forward to read the message displayed on the screen. To whom it may concern. My resignation from Whitmore Insurance should not be construed as an admission of wrongdoing, but rather as protest against the corrupt leadership that has compromised public safety for corporate profit. The attached documentation proves that Whitmore Insurance has been aware of the dangers posed by Cornerstone contractors' faulty electrical work for over 3 years, yet chose to suppress this information to avoid financial liability. I have attempted to address these concerns through proper channels, only to be silenced and sidelined by those whose priority is shareholder value over human lives. The recent fire at the Whitmore estate was tragic but unsurprising, given the company's pattern of negligence. I cannot in good conscience remain silent. The public deserves to know the truth regardless of the personal and professional cost to myself. Victor Hayes. Beneath the message was a link to a cloud storage folder containing dozens of internal documents, emails, reports, inspection records, all appearing to support Hayes's claims of a corporate cover-up dating back years before Eleanor became CEO. Jesus, Jake muttered, scrolling through the files. He's throwing the company under the bus to divert attention from himself. And implicating me in the process, Eleanor added grimly. Several of these documents have my electronic signature approving decisions I never made. Forgeries, almost certainly, but very good ones. The timestamps and routing information all appear legitimate at first glance. Mercer leaned forward, his weathered face grave. He's creating reasonable doubt. Any investigation into his involvement with the fire will now be clouded by these counter-accusations. It's a classic misdirection play. What are our options? Jake asked. Legally, we can challenge the authenticity of the documents, Eleanor replied. Our IT security team is already analyzing the metadata for inconsistencies. But in the court of public opinion, the damage is done, Mercer finished. People remember the accusation, not the retraction. There's something else, Eleanor said, opening another email on the laptop. This came in 5 minutes after Hayes' message from James. The second email was brief but pointed. Eleanor, how unfortunate that your management decisions have come back to haunt you. Perhaps now the board will recognize what I've known for years, that you're unfit to lead the company my ancestors built. When the dust settles, I'll be happy to discuss acquiring the remains of both the estate and the business at a suitably discounted price. James, he's not even trying to hide his involvement, Jake observed. He wants you to know he's behind it. James always did enjoy taking credit for his schemes. His ego wouldn't allow him to remain anonymous, even when it would be strategically advantageous. So we're looking at a coordinated attack, Mercer summarized. Hayes provides the technical expertise and inside access. James provides the motivation and possibly the financing. Together, they damage both your personal reputation and the company's standing. Eleanor closed the laptop with deliberate calm, though Jake could see the tension in her shoulders. We need to get ahead of this, before the news outlets run with Hayes' version of events. A press conference, Jake suggested. More than that, full transparency. We release all the genuine records related to Cornerstone contractors, acknowledge the company's past failures, but clearly demonstrate that the current safety initiative began before the fire, not as a reaction to Hayes' whistleblowing. That's risky, Mercer warned. Opening your books to public scrutiny could reveal other vulnerabilities. More risky than allowing Hayes and James to control the narrative? I don't think so. Eleanor reached for her phone, already composing a message to her communications team. I need one more thing from you, Jake. Something only you can provide. Name it. Your testimony, as both a victim of the fire and a recognized fire safety expert. Your professional assessment of the sabotage, your perspective on our current safety initiatives. Your voice would carry weight that mine simply can't in this situation. Jake considered the request. Stepping into the public eye would mean exposure scrutiny of his past possible targeting by Hayes and James. But it would also mean standing by Eleanor, supporting the safety measures that could prevent other families from experiencing what they had. When and where? 3 o'clock today, main conference room. We'll have media from all major outlets. I'll be there. Eleanor's relief was palpable, though she maintained her professional demeanor. Thank you. I know this isn't what you signed up for when you agreed to help with the investigation. Actually, it's exactly what I signed up for. Protecting people from fire dangers, whether they're physical or bureaucratic. It's the same mission, just a different battlefield. As Eleanor excused herself to prepare for the press conference, Mercer gave Jake a measured look. You're diving into deep waters, Morrison. Once you publicly align yourself with Whitmore against these accusations, you become a target too. I've faced worse. Physical danger, sure, but character assassination, media scrutiny, having your past dredged up and examined for any hint of impropriety, that's a different kind of fire altogether. Jake appreciated the warning, but his mind was already made up. Some risks are worth taking, Mercer. Some people are worth defending. The older man nodded slowly, a knowing look in his eyes. Just be certain of your motivations. Make sure you're doing this for the right reasons, not just because a pretty woman in a power suit asked for your help. Eleanor isn't just a pretty woman in a power suit. She's someone trying to do the right thing despite the personal cost. Someone who's changed more in a few weeks than most people do in a lifetime. Fair enough. But remember, when you step in front of those cameras today, you're not just defending Whitmore Insurance. You're tying your reputation to Eleanor's for better or worse. I'm comfortable with that decision. And surprisingly, he was. Despite the warnings, despite the potential fallout, Jake felt a certainty that had been rare in his life since Sarah's death, the conviction that he was exactly where he needed to be, doing exactly what he should be doing. 3 hours later, Jake stood beside Eleanor at the podium, facing a room filled with reporters and cameras. Eleanor had just completed a comprehensive presentation of the company's safety initiative, including a clear timeline that proved the investigations into Cornerstone contractors had begun months before Hayes' accusations. And now, Eleanor concluded, I'd like to introduce Lieutenant Jake Morrison, Fire Academy instructor and former frontline firefighter. Lieutenant Morrison was present during the fire at my residence and has been consulting on our safety inspection program. He can speak directly to both the technical aspects of the faulty wiring issue and the importance of our preventative measures. Jake stepped forward, acutely aware of the cameras tracking his movement. He changed into his academy uniform at Eleanor's suggestion, the dark blue fabric and silver badge, lending him an authority that his usual casual clothes wouldn't have conveyed. Thank you, Ms. Whitmore. As a firefighter with 15 years of experience before my injury, I've seen firsthand the devastation that electrical fires can cause. What makes these situations particularly tragic is their preventability. With proper inspection and maintenance, these incidents simply shouldn't happen. Jake gestured to the technical diagrams Eleanor had displayed earlier. The wiring issues identified in Cornerstone Contractors' work represent a significant danger to occupants. In layman's terms, they created conditions where insulation could deteriorate over time, creating contact points that generate heat. This heat builds up gradually within walls, often undetected, until it reaches combustible materials like wood framing or insulation. A reporter raised her hand, a skeptical expression on her face. Lieutenant Morrison, given your personal connection to Ms. Whitmore, can you truly provide an unbiased assessment of this situation? Jake met the question directly, his voice steady. My connection to Ms. Whitmore began the night I was called to her home for an emergency plumbing repair, only to find myself in a life-threatening fire situation. My assessment comes from decades of professional experience, not personal bias. The evidence of tampering at the Whitmore residence was documented by independent fire investigators and verified by experts with no connection to either Ms. Whitmore or her company. But isn't it true, another reporter called out, that you've received financial benefits from Ms. Whitmore since the fire? How can the public trust that you're not simply saying what you're paid to say? The question struck closer to home, threatening to expose the complexity of Jake and Eleanor's relationship. Before Jake could respond, Eleanor stepped smoothly to the microphone. If I may address that question, Lieutenant Morrison's late wife was the daughter of Captain Robert Sterling, my adoptive father. After Captain Sterling's death, certain pension and benefit documents intended for Lieutenant Morrison were misfiled and only recently discovered during the fire investigation. Any financial arrangements between Lieutenant Morrison and Whitmore Insurance represent the fulfillment of legal obligations that were incorrectly delayed. They are not compensation for his testimony or consultation. The half-truth flowed so naturally that Jake almost believed it himself. While Robert Sterling had indeed left benefits for Jake, the connection through Sarah was Eleanor's invention, a simplified narrative that avoided the complexities of their actual relationship while providing a plausible explanation for their cooperation. Furthermore, Eleanor continued, Lieutenant Morrison's employment at the Fire Academy was secured through Captain Sterling's recommendation letter, not through any influence from myself or Whitmore Insurance. A murmur passed through the assembled reporters, the story of lost benefits in family connections more compelling than vague accusations of bias. Jake caught Eleanor's eye, a silent acknowledgement passing between them of the line they just crossed, not quite dishonesty, but certainly a strategic reshaping of the truth. The press conference continued for another 30 minutes with Jake addressing technical questions about fire safety and Eleanor outlining the company's commitment to identifying and remedying all at-risk properties. By the time they concluded, the narrative had shifted perceptibly from potential corporate cover-up to proactive safety initiative led by a CEO willing to acknowledge past institutional failures. As the reporters dispersed, Eleanor guided Jake to a private office adjacent to the conference room, closing the door against the lingering questions and camera flashes. Thank you. You were exactly what we needed out there, authoritative, trustworthy, genuine. Did you plan that bit about Sarah being Sterling's daughter? Jake asked, loosening his tie now that the cameras were gone. Improvised it. I hope you don't mind. It seems simpler than explaining our actual situation, and it gives the media a human interest angle that might distract from Hayes' accusations. It's fine. Sterling was like a father to Sarah in many ways. He took a special interest in her career, encouraged her nursing studies. It's not completely fabricated. Eleanor sank into a chair, the composed public persona giving way to evident exhaustion. Hayes will respond. James too. This isn't over. No, but you've seized the initiative, shown that you're confronting the problem openly instead of hiding behind lawyers and PR statements. It's strange. A month ago, my only concern would have been protecting the company's reputation and stock price. Now all I can think about are the families living in houses with the same wiring issues. The children sleeping in bedrooms with fire hazards hidden in their walls. That's called perspective. Sometimes it takes a crisis to find it. Eleanor looked up at him, a question in her eyes that had nothing to do with press conferences or safety initiatives. Why did you do this? Jake, put yourself in the spotlight. Align yourself with me publicly. Mercer must have warned you about the potential blowback. He did, and yet you're here. Jake considered his answer carefully, wanting to be honest without revealing too much of the complex emotions that had been developing over the past weeks. I believe in what you're doing. The safety initiative, the transparency, the willingness to put people before profits. And I believe in who you're becoming. The person Robert Sterling always saw in you. Something shifted in Eleanor's expression, a softening of vulnerability she rarely allowed herself to show. Even when I'm manufacturing convenient half-truths about family connections to placate the media, especially then, because you did it to protect the larger truth, not to hide it. A knock at the door interrupted the moment. Eleanor's assistant entered with an urgent expression. Ms. Whitmore, Mr. Whitmore's attorney is on line 1. He's threatening an immediate lawsuit for defamation unless you retract specific statements from the press conference. Which statements? The implication that Mr. Whitmore might be connected to the fire at your residence. But I never mentioned James at all during the press conference. The attorney claims that your references to coordinated efforts to undermine the company could be construed as implicating Mr. Whitmore given your prior relationship. Eleanor exchanged a glance with Jake, the pieces falling into place. He's creating a paper trail, setting up a scenario where he can claim persecution if the investigation gets too close to him. Classic preemptive defense, Jake agreed. Make any accusation against him seem like personal vendetta rather than legitimate inquiry. Eleanor turned back to her assistant. Tell Mr. Whitmore's attorney that I made no specific accusations against his client, but that Whitmore Insurance will cooperate fully with any law enforcement investigation into the fire. And Lauren, please have security send up the visitor logs for the past 6 months. I want to check something. As the assistant departed, Eleanor moved to her computer, fingers flying across the keyboard. What are you looking for? Jake asked, watching her focused expression. James always was meticulous about covering his tracks, but arrogant enough to make mistakes. If he's been working with Hayes, there might be evidence in the visitor logs or security camera footage. Not direct meetings, he'd be too careful for that, but perhaps patterns we missed before. Jake leaned over her shoulder, studying the database of visitor check-ins she'd pulled up. There, Hayes had a visitor 3 weeks before the fire, listed as Michael Thomas, building inspector. That's not unusual. Risk managers often consult with external experts. True, but look at the timestamp, 7:45 p.m., after normal business hours, and the duration just 18 minutes. Not a formal consultation, more like a quick exchange. Eleanor expanded the record, revealing additional details. Conference room C. No other meeting scheduled there that evening. Can you check if this Michael Thomas appears in any other visitor logs? For other employees, other dates. Eleanor ran the search, the results appearing almost instantly. Nothing. Just that one visit to Hayes after hours. Could be a coincidence, or it could be James using a fake name for a clandestine meeting. The timing fits 3 weeks before the fire, plenty of time to plan, but not so close as to raise suspicion. Is there security camera footage from that area? Should be. All common areas are recorded with a 90-day retention policy. A few more keystrokes brought up the archive of security footage. Eleanor navigated to the date and time in question, focusing on the hallway outside conference room C. The grainy footage showed a tall man in a business suit being escorted by Hayes through the empty corridor. The visitor kept his face angled away from the camera, but his posture and gait were distinctive, confident to the point of arrogance, one hand casually in his pocket. That's James, Eleanor said with certainty. The way he walks, the way he gestures when he talks, I'd recognize it anywhere. So we have Hayes meeting with James under a false name after hours, weeks before the fire. It's circumstantial, but it adds to the pattern. More than circumstantial when combined with everything else. The fake name proves intent to deceive, which suggests consciousness of guilt. Eleanor saved the video file, forwarding it immediately to Daniel Mercer with an explanatory note. This could be the break we needed. Not definitive proof, but enough to justify deeper investigation by actual law enforcement. The assistant returned with printed visitor logs, which Eleanor now examined with renewed focus. Here's something else. 2 days after that meeting, Hayes accessed the building at 2:13 a.m. using his security badge, logged into the system for 47 minutes, then left. According to the access records, he went to the records archive room. where personnel files are kept, including mine, with contact information, home address, security system details, everything he'd need to plan the sabotage. Jake straightened, the implications crystallizing. We need to get this to Mercer right away, and probably directly to the police as well. Already composing the email, I'm copying the chief of detectives. We're on the same charity board, and he'll take this seriously. As Eleanor completed the message, her phone buzzed with an incoming call. She glanced at the display, her expression darkening. It's James, directly, not through his attorney. Put it on speaker. Eleanor answered the call, activating the speakerphone function. James, what an unexpected surprise. Impressive performance at your press conference, Eleanor. Almost convincing, especially with your pet firefighter providing the technical gravitas. James's voice carried the same smooth arrogance Jake had imagined from the security footage, cultured, educated, but with an underlying cruelty. If you're calling to threaten another lawsuit, you can save your breath. I made no accusations against you publicly. No, you're far too clever for that. But we both know what you're thinking, what you're investigating. I'm simply calling to advise caution before you proceed further down this path. Caution, or is this a threat, James? A friendly warning from someone who knows how these games are played. Victor Hayes is unstable, desperate, the kind of man who might lash out if cornered. It would be unfortunate if his actions cause further harm to you or those close to you. The implied threat hung in the air, all the more menacing for its casual delivery. Are you threatening me, James? Because that would be extremely unwise, especially given what we've just discovered about your meeting with Hayes under a false name. A brief silence followed the first crack in James' composure. I meet with many people in my business dealings. I can hardly be held responsible for how they sign in at reception. The security cameras captured your face, James, and the timing 3 weeks before the fire is rather damning when combined with Hayes' middle-of-the-night access to my personnel records 2 days later. Another pause, longer this time, as James recalculated his position. You always were thorough, Eleanor. It's what I admired about you, even as it infuriated me. But you're overreaching here, connecting dots that exist only in your imagination. The police will make that determination. I've just sent them the evidence, including this phone call, which I should mention is being recorded. How convenient that your plumber turned out to be a firefighter. And how fortunate that he happened to be in your house exactly when the fire started. Have you considered, Eleanor, that perhaps this hero of yours isn't quite what he appears? Jake tensed at the implied accusation, but Eleanor's calm response betrayed no concern. If you're suggesting Jake had anything to do with the fire, you're truly desperate, James. His presence in my home that night was documented by the emergency dispatch service. His reputation as a firefighter is impeccable, and unlike you, he has nothing to gain from destroying my property. Everyone has something to gain, Eleanor. The question is whether they're honest about their motivations. Ask your firefighter friend about the pension he's receiving, about the convenient job that fell into his lap after rescuing you, about his sudden financial stability after years of struggle. Goodbye, James. Any further communication should go through my attorneys. Eleanor ended the call, her composed expression giving no hint of the tension Jake could see in her shoulders. He's trying to sow doubt, Jake said, breaking the silence that followed. Classic manipulation tactic. If he can't defend himself, he attacks someone else. I know, and I'm not falling for it. But there was a question in her eyes, not doubt exactly, but a need for reassurance. The pension, the job, those were legitimate, Eleanor. I didn't manipulate the situation to gain benefits. I know that, Jake. But James raised a valid question, even if for the wrong reasons. The timing does look convenient from the outside. You were in my house when the fire started. You benefited materially from the aftermath. You think I had something to do with the fire? No, of course not. But in building our case against Hayes and James, we need to anticipate every counter-argument they might make, including pointing the finger at you. Jake understood the logic even as he felt a sting at having his integrity questioned. What do you suggest? We need to establish your whereabouts before arriving at my house that night. The emergency dispatch call, any witnesses who saw you with Emma before you left, receipts from your dinner, anything that creates a clear timeline. I was with Emma until the call came in. Mrs. Patterson, our neighbor, came over to watch her while I went to your place. She can verify the time. Good. And you went directly to my house. Stopped for gas on the way. Paid with my credit card, so there should be a record of the time and location. Eleanor nodded, adding these details to her notes. That should help establish that you couldn't have set up the sabotage in advance. As for motive, we'll emphasize that you had no way of knowing about the pension or job possibilities before the fire. Those came to light afterward as a result of the document discovery. Jake watched Eleanor's shift into strategic planning mode, her mind mapping out potential attacks and defenses. It was impressive to witness even when he was the subject of the scrutiny. You're good at this, anticipating moves, planning, counter-arguments. Years of corporate warfare, you learn to see 3 steps ahead or you don't survive. Seems exhausting. It is, but necessary, especially when dealing with someone like James who views everything as a game to be won regardless of the human cost. Eleanor's phone buzzed again, a text from Mercer. Daniel says the police are taking our evidence seriously. They're seeking warrants for Hayes' and James' phone records and emails, and they've assigned a detective from the arson investigation unit to lead the case. That's a good start, but not a conclusion. These investigations take time and James has resources connections. This could drag on for months. Jake checked his watch, suddenly remembering Emma. I need to pick up Emma from after-school care. They charge extra if you're late. Of course, I'll keep you updated on any developments. As Jake prepared to leave, Eleanor touched his arm lightly, stopping him. Jake, I want to be clear about something. Nothing James said changes how I see you or what I believe about your character. I trust you. Completely. The simple declaration carried more weight than elaborate assurances would have. Jake nodded, accepting both the statement and the unspoken apology for the necessary questioning. I know, and I understand why we needed to address the potential accusations. It's the smart play. Not just smart, necessary, because I won't let them hurt you or Emma in their attempts to get to me. The protective fierceness in Eleanor's voice reveals something beyond professional alliance, a personal investment in Jake and Emma's well-being that transcended strategic considerations. We'll get through this, Eleanor, all of us. As Jake drove to Emma's school, his mind processed the day's developments. The press conference, the evidence against Hayes and James, the implied threats, Eleanor's unwavering support despite James's insinuations. The situation had escalated beyond what any of them had anticipated when Jake had first stepped into that burning mansion. Emma waited at the school entrance, her backpack nearly as large as she was, her face lighting up when she spotted Jake's truck. Daddy, you're late. Did you have a super important teacher meeting? Something like that, princess. I had to help Eleanor with a problem at her company. Emma climbed into the truck, buckling her seatbelt with practiced ease. Is Eleanor okay? She looked sad last time she came for dinner. She's dealing with some difficult people at work, but she's handling it well. Grown-up stuff is complicated. Yes, it certainly is. Is she still taking me to see the ballet for my birthday? As far as I know. Why, Kayla at school said her mom saw you and Eleanor on TV talking about fires. She said Eleanor might go to jail for lying about something. Jake nearly swerved, caught off guard by the playground version of the day's events. That's not true, sweetheart. Eleanor didn't lie about anything. Some people are trying to blame her for things that aren't her fault, but she's fighting back with the truth. Like when Billy said, I broke the classroom globe, but it was really him. Exactly like that. Sometimes people try to blame others for their mistakes. Will the police believe Eleanor? They believed me about the globe because Miss Jensen saw Billy do it. I think they will. We have evidence like Ms. Jensen seeing what really happened. Emma seemed satisfied with this explanation, moving on to describe her day at school with the mercurial attention span of a 7-year-old. But Jake's mind remained fixed on the sobering reality that the conflict had now touched Emma's world, that playground gossip had transformed a corporate battle into personal concern for his daughter. That evening, after Emma was asleep, Jake called Eleanor to relay the school incident. I'm so sorry, Jake. I never intended for this to affect Emma. It's not your fault. Kids pick up on things, repeat what their parents say without understanding the context. Still, I hate that she's worried about me, that your family is being dragged into this mess. Eleanor, you are part of our family now, at least as far as Emma's concerned. She cares about you, which means your problems are her problems too. That's how it works with people who matter to each other. A pause followed the phone connection, carrying only the sound of Eleanor's measured breathing. Thank you for saying that. It means more than you know. It's just the truth. I've been thinking about James's accusation that your being at my house during the fire was too convenient to be coincidental. We've already addressed that. The timeline, the dispatch records. No, that's not what I meant. I'm not questioning your innocence. I'm thinking about the actual coincidence. What are the mathematical odds that the one person called to my house for an emergency repair would be not just any firefighter, but the specific firefighter my father most admired? The one person he had left provisions for in his will. Jake had wondered the same thing in quiet moments over the past weeks. Pretty astronomical, I'd say. Unless it wasn't coincidence at all. What if it was something else entirely? Like what? I don't know. Fate, divine intervention, Robert watching over both of us somehow. The suggestion was unlike Eleanor, who typically approached life with rational analysis rather than philosophical speculation. I'm not sure I believe in fate, but I do believe that sometimes life offers second chances when we least expect them. For both of us, a second chance through fire, burning away what was false to reveal what matters. That's poetic for a corporate CEO. Eleanor's laugh was soft, genuine. Perhaps I'm evolving, learning to see beyond spreadsheets and risk assessments. Evolution looks good on you. The conversation shifted to more immediate concerns, security precautions, given James' veiled threats, updates from Mercer about the police investigation plans for the upcoming weekend when Eleanor would join them for Emma's regular Sunday dinner. By the time they said goodnight, a sense of partnership had solidified between them, not just in addressing the Hayes-James situation, but in navigating the complex relationship developing among Jake, Eleanor, and Emma. A family of sorts formed not through traditional bonds, but through shared experience and mutual choice. The following weeks brought steady progress in the investigation. Hayes's financial records revealed substantial payments from an offshore account linked to James, establishing a clear money trail. Phone records showed dozens of calls between the two men in the months leading up to the fire. Most damning, a search of Hayes's apartment uncovered detailed diagrams of the Whitmore Estate's electrical system with specific notations about vulnerabilities and optimal sabotage points. James remained publicly defiant, his attorneys issuing statements dismissing the evidence as circumstantial and suggesting a vendetta by Eleanor. But privately, Mercer reported negotiations had begun regarding a potential plea agreement. The prosecution had offered Hayes a reduced sentence in exchange for testimony against James as the mastermind of the plot. Throughout this period, Eleanor became an increasingly present figure in Jake and Emma's lives. Sunday dinners expanded to include Friday movie nights. Eleanor attended Emma's school science fair, helping her create a project on the physics of ballet that won first prize. When Emma caught the flu, Eleanor rearranged board meetings to bring homemade soup and read stories during Jake's teaching hours. For his part, Jake found himself thinking about Eleanor in moments when work or practicality didn't demand it, wondering about her day, anticipating her perspective on events, missing her presence when schedules kept them apart. It was a gradual realization, this shift from alliance to friendship to something neither of them had named, but both increasingly acknowledged through glances held too long and conversations that stretched into the night. Emma's birthday arrived on a perfect May morning, sunlight streaming through newly green trees. The ballet excursion Eleanor had arranged exceeded even Jake's expectations, not just box seats and a backstage tour, but a private lesson with the principal dancer, who spent 45 minutes teaching Emma basic movements from Swan Lake. Emma had been speechless with delight, her usual chatter replaced by wide-eyed wonder as she followed the dancer's graceful demonstrations. Afterward, they'd gone to an upscale restaurant where the staff treated Emma like visiting royalty, complete with a special dessert featuring a chocolate swan and 8 delicate candles. Jake had watched his daughter's face throughout the celebration, memorizing her expressions of joy and surprise. But increasingly, he found his gaze drawn to Eleanor as well, to the genuine pleasure she took in Emma's happiness, to the way she'd planned each detail with thoughtful care. That evening, after Emma had finally succumbed to exhaustion, still wearing the ballet slippers the dancers had signed for her, Jake and Eleanor sat on the balcony of the new apartment, sharing a bottle of wine as the city lights sparkled below. Thank you for today. It was beyond anything I could have given her. She deserved it. The way she works at her dancing, her dedication, it reminds me of Sarah. That same quiet determination. Jake raised an eyebrow, surprised by the comparison. You never met Sarah? No, but I've heard you talk about her, seen her pictures. And there's so much of her in Emma, not just physically, but in her spirit. Sarah would have liked you, I think. Once she got past the corporate armor, she had a talent for seeing the person beneath the surface. Like father, like daughter. Emma has that same insight. The questions she asks, they cut right to the heart of things. They sat in comfortable silence, the evening breeze carrying distant sounds of the city. Hayes accepted the plea deal, Eleanor said after a while. He'll testify against James in exchange for a reduced sentence, 5 years instead of 15. And James, his attorneys are still fighting, but the prosecutor believes Hayes' testimony will be enough to secure a conviction. Attempted murder, arson, corporate espionage, the full package. How do you feel about it? Eleanor considered the question, swirling the wine in her glass. Relieved mostly, that the truth is coming out, that he won't be able to hurt anyone else. But also sad that someone I once cared for could become so consumed by bitterness and revenge. You can't save everyone, Eleanor. I know, but I can try to understand how it happened. How someone starts with normal human resentment and escalates to potentially deadly sabotage. Some questions don't have satisfying answers. Perhaps not, but asking them keeps us human, I think. Prevents us from becoming as callous as those we oppose. Jake studied Eleanor's profile in the soft evening light. The elegant lines of her face, the thoughtful set of her mouth, the strength evident in her posture even in repose. So different from the cold executive who had dismissed him 6 months ago, yet recognizably the same person evolving, rather than transforming entirely. You've changed, Eleanor, since that night in the fire. She turned to face him, a small smile playing at her lips. For better or worse, definitely better. You've found your way back to the person Robert Sterling raised, someone who values human connection above corporate success, who fights for what's right even when it costs you personally. I had help finding my way. A guide who showed me what courage really looks like, not in boardroom battles, but in everyday choices to do the right thing even when no one is watching. The moment between them deepened, charged with unspoken feelings neither was quite ready to name. Jake set down his wineglass, making a decision he'd been considering for weeks. I have something for you, a birthday gift in a way, though not for Emma. He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small worn leather case. Inside was a silver firefighter's badge, its surface scratched from years of service but still gleaming in the low light. This was my first badge as a probationary firefighter. Captain Sterling presented it to me when I completed training. I've kept it all these years, even after I couldn't serve anymore. A reminder of who I was, what I stood for. Eleanor accepted the case with evident reverence, her fingers tracing the embossed emblem. Jake, I can't take this. It's too important to you. That's why I want you to have it. Because you've helped me reclaim that part of myself, not just through the academy position, but by reminding me that being a firefighter was never just a job. It was a calling, a way of seeing the world and my place in it. I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything, just keep it, as a reminder that sometimes we have to lose everything to find what matters most. Eleanor closed the case carefully, holding it against her heart for a moment before meeting Jake's eyes. I have something for you, too, not a physical gift, but news I wanted to share in person. What kind of news? The rebuilding plans for the estate have been approved. Construction starts next month. That's wonderful. I know how much it means to you to reclaim that space. It's not just about reclaiming it, it's about reimagining it, which is why I've had the architects include a separate guest house on the property. 2 bedrooms, full kitchen, private entrance, connected to the main house but independent. Jake's confusion must have shown on his face because Eleanor continued with uncharacteristic hesitation. It's for you and Emma, if you want it. A place where you could have more space, a yard for Emma to play in, better schools nearby, where you could be close to me. The offer hung between them, its implications extending far beyond real estate. Eleanor, I don't know what to say. You don't have to decide now. The offer stands regardless of whatever else might develop between us. It's not conditional. I just want you both in my life in whatever capacity feels right. Jake considered the proposition, its generosity, and the careful way Eleanor had framed it to avoid pressure or obligation. Can I think about it? Talk to Emma. Of course. Take all the time you need. But even as he asked for time, Jake knew his answer. Had known it perhaps since that night in the burning mansion when he'd made the choice to risk everything for someone who hadn't valued him. A choice that had set in motion a journey neither of them could have anticipated, from antagonists to allies to friends, to something more profound than any label could capture. Actually, I don't need time. I already know what Emma will say. She's been dropping hints about wanting a dog, which is impossible in an apartment. And she talks about you constantly ask when you're coming over, saves things to show you, includes you in her bedtime prayers. And what about you, Jake? What do you want? The question was direct, vulnerable in its simplicity. Jake met Eleanor's gaze, finding in her eyes the same certainty he felt in his heart. I want what I've always wanted, a home for Emma, work that matters, and someone to share it all with, the struggles and the joys, the ordinary days and the extraordinary ones. Is that someone me? I think you know it is. Eleanor's smile blossomed slowly, transforming her face with a joy that transcended her usual composed beauty. Then yes, to the guest house, to whatever comes next, yes. As they sat together on the balcony, the city spread before them like a field of stars. Jake thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. A journey that began with fire and fear, with loss and misunderstanding. A journey that had forged something stronger and more enduring than either of them could have built alone. In the apartment behind them, Emma slept peacefully, dreaming perhaps of dancing swans and birthday candles, unaware that her life had just expanded to include not just a new home, but a new family configuration, not traditional perhaps, but no less real for its unconventional origins. And in the quiet space between them, Jake and Eleanor held the knowledge that sometimes rescue comes in unexpected forms. That sometimes the people who save us are the ones we least expect. And that sometimes the greatest flames aren't the ones that destroy, but the ones that illuminate our path forward, burning away what doesn't matter to reveal what truly does. A second chance born in fire, a future rising from the ashes of the past.